Okay, good evening. I know we're probably going to have a few more folks coming in over the next few minutes, but I want to keep aware of the time. Your time is important, so I am going to get going. My name is Brad Van Beek, and I'm the administrator at Legacy Christian School, and I want to welcome you to the special presentation of Teens and Screens, and I'm excited for this opportunity to learn a little bit more, and I'm thankful for Dan to his time coming out here and sharing with us. I don't know how much you guys know, but on Friday, your 7th and 8th grade students will also hear a presentation by Dan here. So we're excited for that. But before we begin, I would like to have a word of prayer. So please pray with me. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this evening that we can come together as parents of middle schoolers, and maybe there's some high schoolers or some elementary parents here. We thank you for this opportunity to come here and hear this presentation and learn some more about technology and ways that we can monitor it, be better parents, give us wisdom as we raise our kids in this world. Thank you for this time that we can be together. Thank you for the schools that are represented here, and I just pray that what we can learn to raise our kids in a way that will honor and glorify you. We ask this all in Jesus' name, amen.
Hello, I'm Rachel Morin. For those of you who don't know me, I teach technology at Legacy. Before I introduce our guest speaker tonight, this is a very important presentation for me. Not only I have young children who are being raised in this world, but just last week, some 7th graders said to me, we have a new filtering system, and they said to me, you know, you can't block that website. And I said, okay, how do you guys know that? And they say every single day someone is creating a new link for us to use. While this website was harmless, there are so many websites out there that are not harmless that people are changing every day. So I'm really excited for this speech tonight. So our speaker, Dan Landstra, he works at Unity Christian, and he's the director of spiritual life and leadership. He's been at Unity for the past 27 years. His passion is leading students to see Christ in all areas of life, coaching them as followers of Christ to become leaders. He spends a lot of time speaking with student groups and parents like this. We appreciate him taking the time to come to us. I asked him for a fun fact, and the fun fact he gave me was this. Him and his wife, Laura, have both ran a marathon and riverbank run just in the last month. As someone who's now deferred the riverbank run twice just this past year, I'm feeling pretty guilty about that, but that was his fun fact, and I thought that was a pretty good one. So if you guys can join me in welcoming Dan Landstra.
Thank you very much. It's not that impressive, really, so thank you. It's really very nice of you. It's good to be here. This is my first time literally in this building. I was in the Old South Christian many times. Growing up a Unity kid, coming to South for all the games and different things. My mom is a South grad. My dad went to Grand Rapids Christian. We go to Unity. I think our grandkids have to go to Calvin, I think. So either way, just to fill in all the blanks. So it's really nice to be here. I really do consider South Christian and Unity Christian to be very similar. Community-wise, our parents, our kids, a lot of Unity kids know a lot of South kids, and so there's a lot of connections between our two schools. Even our schools look a little bit alike from the outside now, so I mean there's that. So tonight, what I hope to do, this will go quickly, and I don't want to overwhelm you with information, but I'm going to give you a lot of information. And there's no way that we will solve all the world's problems in the next hour and a half or hour or whatever we have. But it's to give you an overview of like, here's what's happening in high school and middle school and grade school. Here's some things to be aware of. Here's some things you can do, because parents are not powerless in this world that we live in that is dominated by technology. And a big part of it is just to become aware. So I guess in my own head for you, I think of there's discover, like you're gonna learn some things maybe tonight. Maybe this is all old information for some of you. We'll find out. So discover the first thing. Discern is the next thing. Okay, like, okay, what am I going to, how do I judge this? I learned about it, now what am I supposed to do with it? And that goes to the third one, which is decide, right? So discover, discern, decide. And if you can do some of those things with some of these topics, then we've made a little ground. My hope is that whatever you hear tonight, we can take from here and maybe talk about this with other people, other parents, our kids. Obviously, I'm looking forward to coming back on Friday and talking with your middle schoolers. So I was asked on the way in tonight, like, how did you start with this, like these talks? And I'll just be honest with you, about 15-ish years ago or so, a student came into my classroom after school, and he said, hey, I need to talk to you about something. And he went on to describe that he was really struggling with pornography. And so I was not prepared for that conversation. Back then I had never had that conversation with a student before. I didn't expect that I was going to have that conversation, and I probably didn't do a great job with that conversation because it caught me off guard. But we kept an ongoing conversation about it, and he's in a much better place. But from there, it was like a little bit of a door was opened, and little by little, more people started to come. At first, all just guys, and then some girls, and then it was not just pornography, it was other stuff. And little by little, more and more of these things that are the result of a technologically sophisticated world started to come my direction. I thought, I can't just talk about this with these kids. I got to talk about it with parents. And then as God's will has it, all of a sudden I'm going into schools and talking in churches and leaving Michigan, and it's been good. It's been a really good thing. I never went into teaching to do this, but this is where 27 years of teaching in high school has led. So hopefully that comes through as we talk about this tonight. So let's get rolling here. First thing, I don't know that you will know any of these things, but these are 3 pictures, and the one's a little choppy, the biggest one there, that are your kids would probably know something about, because they all come from TikTok, right? And they're all challenges that are part of TikTok. First of all, the picture on the left is called the Milk Crate Challenge. And there's a better than average chance that a number of kids in either your middle schools or south has tried that, stacking up milk crates and seeing how fast you can walk up them and walk back down them. And there are millions of videos of kids walking up, or young adults walking up and down, and there have been broken bones and concussions and whatever else, and they're all really short and they get a lot of laughs. But how many of you have heard of the Milk Crate Challenge before? Okay, good. I thought there would be some. Down in the bottom right down there is another TikTok challenge called Devious Licks. And you probably, if you watch local news, have heard that one as well. That is across the country, high schools especially. Kids are vandalizing school property, and in some cases stealing school property, and then posting a video of it on TikTok. And a lick is sort of the TikTok slang term for stealing something, for theft, right? So a lick is to take something. So devious licks is destroying or taking property. Granville High School had a huge issue with this. Hudsonville High School had a pretty significant issue with this. I don't know how much more out this way in Kent County there was, but we had a little issue with this at Unity. Small, but still was part of that. So that's another thing that came from TikTok. And then the young boy on the top right up there, is a boy from Colorado. Joshua is his name, and he died about a month or so ago from something called the Blackout Challenge, which is another TikTok challenge where kids choke themselves to the point of passing out, and then they record it. And there have been 3 kids in America who have died as a result of the Blackout Challenge. So TikTok will say that they try to take these things off, or they monitor that stuff, but the amount of volume of videos is too many for them to even keep track of, right? So that's an introduction to, here's why this matters. You can't keep track of everything, and I'm not going to try to suggest that you should, because you can't, because I can't, and this is my job. So the point is not to know everything, it's to be aware of, like, what are the things that we should generally be aware of, and what can we do? All right, so going forward here, the next thing is, I think it's really, really important that we have a lens. As a Christian school educator, I believe it's really important that if you're going to look at a topic, you can look at it in black and white terms and say, well, we're just going to ban this, or we're just going to get rid of that. But that might not necessarily be enough when you're looking at issues of the heart. So we need a lens through which to understand some of these things. This is one of my lens passages, because I think if we try to see things through the lens of Scripture, that matters in how we might address some of these things. I know you can read, but I'll just read this through. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. And then this is another one. Preach the word, be prepared in season and out of season, correct, rebuke, and encourage with great patience and careful instruction. That's a Christian school teacher motto, but also a parent motto of how do we go about addressing these issues with our kids. There's a biblical kind of mandate of how maybe best to do that. And then this is also from the same chapter. People will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off to myths. So that's what we'll talk about are the competing voices in our culture. There are so many voices that feed into the lives of young people today that are the result directly of technology that you did not have when you were growing up. So I try to get parents to think about, if you think of culture and what culture offers, everything, the good and the bad, you experience that at a rate coming towards you. If you can think of a drinking straw from like McDonald's, the circumference of that straw as a constant flow, that's the way maybe it flowed at you, just to give you a way to think about it. Your kids today, your grandkids today, they're experiencing culture as well, but it's coming at them at the rate through like a culvert that's underneath the road, okay, a drainage culvert. It's like drinking from a fire hose for them. There's so much they can't keep up, but yet it's shaping them to a degree as well. So what are parents, what is a community supposed to do? Well, here's something that's important. This is an old proverb that is not from the Bible. If you want to understand water, don't ask a fish. Right? And I don't know if you've ever heard that before. If you want to understand water, don't ask a fish. Now, if you ask a high school classroom of kids, like, why would you not ask a fish? Someone's going to most likely say, because fish can't talk, or whatever, some really smart, intelligent answer. But the reason is because a fish does not know what it means to be wet, because it's never experiencing anything other than the environment it's always been in, where you have been both wet and dry, so you understand the difference between the two. So if you really want to understand water, you have to talk to someone who's been both in it and out of it. So, going ahead, if you've ever heard this expression before, okay, boomer, that's not a compliment to you, in case you were wondering. Kids will say this today to parents, to older people, when that older person says something that they think is antiquated, old-fashioned, or whatever. An okay boomer is reference to being a baby boomer, right? You're old. So okay boomer, like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. You're out of touch. You don't know what you're talking about. And sometimes they're right, maybe, but sometimes they're wrong. So the reason I put those two slides together is because I want you to think of, if you want to understand teenagers, you got to kind of get into teenage world and understand teenage mindset, because you can't look at their world today through the lens of a 40-year-old. It won't work. It's not the same. Your high school experience was miles and miles different than their high school experience, and you know that, but as I'm in it every day, I see that more and more all the time. So here's a question for you. Which world is most dangerous for our kids today? And you have to decide between these two: the real world or the digital world. The actual world out there, outside of this auditorium and building, out in, the rough streets of Cutlerville, is that the most dangerous place? Grand Rapids, Detroit, Chicago, or is the digital world? Now, I won't ask you to tell me what your answer is, because I don't want to put you on the spot. But I would like you to raise your hand for something, if you could, for me. How many of you have an answer? Like you have, yeah, I know what answer I would give. Okay, so I will tell you, you might not be surprised, most parents today of middle school and high school kids still do believe that the real danger is in the real world. That's far more dangerous than the digital world. And we, parents in my generation, I'm a middle Gen Xer, okay? So whether you're a Gen Xer or a millennial, or whether you're a baby boomer or whatever, as the generations have gone on, we've increasingly protected our kids from the outside world. everything from they got to wear helmets and knee pads and elbow pads when they, walk down the sidewalk, to want to make sure that they seat belts. Everything has been very protective of them on the outside world. And so we feel like if we're doing all that, it must be dangerous out there. Like, it's got to be really scary. Well, the fact is that statistics and research show the world right now, as a general rule in America, is safer than it's ever been. There are less murders, there are less assaults, there are less rapes than there have been for decades as a general statement in this country. So the outside world actually is becoming safer than what it was. The digital world is becoming far more dangerous. So why do we get so worried about the real world? There certainly are some real things to be concerned about, but you also have to remember that the bad things that happen are amplified because of the news, right? You're going to hear. You've heard the expression, if it bleeds, it leads, right? And so that's the way the news cycle is. You're exposed to that far more. But maybe the digital world, for kids, is a far more dangerous world. And I don't need you to tell me what all these are, but just so you know, these are the top 6 social media sites and apps in America for teenagers. And I'm sure most of you know all of them, but I put up there Facebook, even though your kids only use Facebook so they know what you're doing, right? They don't use Facebook. That's the way they keep track of grandpa and grandma and what's going on with the family and stuff like that. But the rest of them, and obviously TikTok being the newest one, in 2017, TikTok was barely on the map. Today, it is used extremely often by kids, in the top 2 most often used apps. And obviously, we have the issue of the phone. I left mine down there in my bag, but I think you might agree with me that this is probably the single most powerful piece of information gathering device, kind of a thing that we've ever had. It is unbelievable power that sits in your pocket or in your purse or in your shirt pocket, whatever. It is an unbelievably, and we know that because we've been around long enough to realize how powerful it is, but we're still catching up a little bit with what it actually does, especially with younger kids as well. This is a movie that, if you ever wanted to take some time, I wouldn't recommend it for your middle school kids. I wouldn't recommend necessarily for some of you that we show with the high school kids. I've watched it several times. I think right now it's on either Amazon or Netflix, but it's a movie about being an 8th grader in America. Now, one thing that some of you know, maybe some of you don't, in a community like Cutlerville, in a community like Hudsonville, we tend to trail behind culturally by a few years. So what's happening in Chicago, New York, Detroit, we're not experiencing those same things. So this would not be a dead-on replication of what is happening down the road at Legacy. Probably not at all. But it is probably a direction that the kids in Legacy are headed in the next several years. And most of you, because you remember your 8th grade experience, is very, very different from that. So there's something called age compression, right? And age compression is that what you experienced as a senior in high school at age 18, well, today, those same experiences are being had by kids who are far younger than that, so 14, maybe. And if a 14-year-old experienced something in 1999, well, today, maybe a 10-year-old is experiencing those same things. So we take what used to be at this age and we've compressed it down so kids are experiencing far more at a far earlier age. If that's true, then does that mean they've adapted cognitively, emotionally, spiritually to adjust to those experiences happening that much earlier? And the fact is that they haven't, right? They're still kids at that age. Their brains haven't changed that much yet. And I would compare that to the invention of the automobile. And I'm assuming all of you drove here tonight. And one thing that happened when they invented the automobiles, well, they wanted to make it so that everyone could have one. So they made it cheap, right? They made it affordable. And more people started to drive. And as more and more people started to drive, they realized this is a life-changing invention. This is a world-changing invention. Now, this is an opinion. You're not obligated to agree with me on this. I think the phone is equally as important significantly as an invention as the invention of the car. I really believe that. It's changed the world as much as the invention of the automobile. I really believe that. You don't have to believe that. I'm not asking you or trying to convince you. I really believe that. Here's the other thing. When more and more cars hit the road, more and more people started to die because people were running into each other. So what do we do now? So they didn't decide to pass legislation to get rid of cars because that was just not practical. Too many people had them. They were too useful. They didn't do that. What they did is tried to make the car safer. And they've continued to do that up till now, right? You got 15 airbags and better seat belts and more crumple zones, and they just made them better. And so to a degree, it probably isn't realistic. I know some of us would maybe like to, and sometimes I'm one of them, who would say, let's just get rid of it. Honestly, if I ruled the world and I could make any decision I want to, I would get rid of cell phones. I would. I'd just say, we're done. It's out. I'm banning them forever. But I don't rule the world, nor will I ever, and that would be a bad decision. But because we can't have that, how are we going to redeem them? Just like they did with the automobile. That's what we have to sort of consider and think about. So just a few facts for you. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. These are national stats from Common Sense Media. So this may not be true of your son or daughter or your grandson or granddaughter, but it's just true in general. 7 hours and 22 minutes a day is what they gathered as far as data from 2019. That's not including homework time, okay? Yeah, and it's just either on a laptop, messing around doing whatever, or mostly on their phone. So today, especially in COVID days, for a lot of people, that's longer than their work day, 7 hours and 22 minutes. And if you factor that into, a lot of them have to go to school for 6, 7, 8 hours. That's a lot of time. So what are they doing in that amount of time? Well, here are the most used and popular social media apps for teenagers. And are they exactly in order of popularity? Not necessarily, but it's a confusing thing because there's a difference between most popular and most used. Right now, Instagram is the most popular social media app for teenagers, but the most used app is Snapchat. Okay, there's a difference there, and it's subtle, and we don't need to get into that, but every kid pretty much uses Snapchat. 98% of teenagers today in middle-class communities have cell phones, so virtually all of them have a smartphone, not just a cell phone, but a smartphone. Okay, I did not put up there. There's a couple of gaming social media apps as well that I did not put up there because it's a niche. Twitch is one of them, if you've ever heard of Twitch, and Discord are two social media apps for gamers. And those, if you have a son or daughter who's really into, mostly probably a son, who's really into gaming, those are two to be aware of because there's a lot of interaction that goes on between people they don't know, sometimes on Twitch and Discord also. And then if you want to know what they're doing as far as TV and movies, that is what our kids use most when it comes to TV and movies. I don't know how many of you in this room have this or not, but less than 5% of high school students today in middle-class America have an antenna on their roof or in their attic or whatever. And the vast majority of them do not watch cable and satellite TV. They're watching something that is streaming, something they can watch on their phone. Right? And so that, unless you get a streaming service, you can't plug the coax cable into your cell phone. So they don't know the same things. They don't remember what the concept of TGIF was, right? Or must-see TV on NBC. That's all kind of gone by the wind now. Maybe you didn't realize this. There's going to be only one brand new sitcom released on major network television this year. Nobody watches them anymore. And that's a change because of technology, right? So I call them, because they are called digital natives. If you're wondering where A to Z, what is that? That's generation. So Generation Z is the generation that has been born from basically 1995. You remember Al Gore invented the internet in 1995, right? So then from after that until about 2008, 2009, 2010, that's Gen Z. But 2010 till now, that's Gen A. It's called Gen Alpha, right? So just so you know, we're in the next generation of kids that were born in 2010. Those are our current grade school going into middle school kids, and things have already changed. So to their credit, something we got to say that it's not all bad. There's some really good things. They are far more socially aware. Our kids today are far more connected to what's going on around them in terms of social awareness. Whether you agree with it all or not, that's to be determined by you. But just some examples. This young lady, some of you might know her name, but it's Greta Thunberg. She was the 13-year-old who addressed the United Nations on climate issues. Now, whether you agreed with her beliefs or her understanding of that, that's not the point. The point is that she's 13 years old and she's standing in front of an assembly of world leaders talking about climate change. That didn't happen in the 1980s. It just didn't happen. So that's one example. They're not confined to traditional norms anymore. Things are different. They think outside the box. People used to talk about that all the time. These kids actually do that. They think outside the box. Example, this kid, Wolf Kuklier. I don't know if you've ever heard this name before. This kid was 17 years old when this picture was taken. He's 2 years older now, but at age 17, he was doing a summer internship for NASA at a space observatory in Maryland, and he discovered a planet, right? At 17 years old, I could barely get out of bed, and this kid is discovering a planet at age 17, and the reason he's able to do that is in the technology he was asked to use, it's intuitive for him. And many of you know when your kids pick up a device, they're very intuitive with that. They just figure it out. And you're poking around and, you're not in the world. And your 5-year-old, kid or grandkid is like, oh, just do this and this and this and that's it, right? Well, that's what allows this generation to be so outside the box. Technology does allow them more exposure. That they're able to get themselves out there in a way that never has happened before. Some of that's good. Some of that's maybe not so good. But it has allowed them to do things that you weren't able to do. Some of you might know who this is. This is Billie Eilish. And she's been making music and putting it online since she's been 13 years old. So when she was 17 years old, she released her first full album and put it out there. And she won, as a result of that, 7 Grammys. Now she's 19 years old, or almost 19 years old, and she's got 11 Grammys before she's 19 years old, 11 of them. And her brother, his name is Phineas, he recorded her first album on a MacBook in their basement. That's how they did it. Now, no professional recording studio, a MacBook and her in their basement, 7 Grammys later, that's Billie Eilish. So now, would there have been a possibility of that 20 years ago? Likely not. Like you had to have a connection. You had to pay your dues. Now you don't. Social media can make you famous overnight. And I know that probably bothers some of you, that sometimes you can be famous for doing nothing, i.e. the Kardashians, right? But she actually has done something. She actually has talent, right? And so that's something to be aware of too. They're highly connected. This is both a really positive but also a concern, because they're connected to what? Well, they're connected to each other. I coach track as well at Unity, and if I don't have my phone on me, I say, can someone get a hold of if we need somebody? And nearly everybody will have information to contact the person that I need to contact. I say, are they your friend? No, but I follow them, and so they have a way to get a hold of them. So there's a lot of connection, but there's not a lot of actual real connection. And that sometimes is a bit of an issue. And I'll get into why that is in just a little bit. But overall, our kids are highly connected to each other. It's amazing that with that degree of connection, how they suffer from loneliness, right? Because loneliness is a huge issue with this generation, despite the fact that they're really, really connected. And to the credit of our kids, it does allow you to have greater oversight over your kids. You can keep track of them. Now, I want you to take this with a grain of salt, okay? Because there's a balancing act with this one between it's good to know what's going on and too much. And your kids know this too. Where do you strike that balance? Now, if you have this, fine, okay? I'm not going to try to talk you out of it or talk you into it. But let me just speak to you something that some of you already know. Your kids know how to get around this. If you don't know what Life 360 is, it's something you put on their phone and your phone, and it basically is a tracking device. It lets you know where your kids are at all times because it uses their phone as sort of a ping device, and it keeps track of it, lets you know where that phone is. So what does a kid do who doesn't want their parent to know where they are? They just leave their phone at somebody's house, okay, and then they go and have their fun. Happens all the time. right? Or they give their phone to a friend and then have their friend respond to the text from mom. It happens all the time. So some of those things just create better criminals to a degree, right? And that's something you have to be aware of as well. It's like, well, what am I really after here? I know several parents who have the phone shuts off at 10. Their phone just turns off at 10 o'clock. And that's a good idea if your kid is also at home at 10 o'clock. But if their phone shuts off at 10 o'clock and they're gone, they're just using somebody else's phone, right? There's kids now who buy burner phones. They just buy a phone from Walmart that is really cheap, and they'll use that as a backup phone. So you can make as many rules as you want. There's a way around that, which is why just saying no is probably not a great final answer. And again, that's not meant to discourage you, but just to make you aware. Kids are smarter than we think they are sometimes in some of this stuff, because you would have done the same thing if you had that technology back when you were that age. Many of you, not all of you, probably not most of you, maybe none of you, right? All right, so some concerns that I want to make sure we talk about. Let me take just a second here and flip over to this. I will give you time if you have any for some questions too. I don't want to just run through this and not give you any chance to ask any questions. So concerns that I want to address with you a little bit here. One is polarization. And I feel like I need to give you a little bit of a prelude to this, because we are living in a very polarized culture where people are still walking, in many cases, on a very ragged edge emotionally. I didn't come here tonight to ruffle feathers. I didn't come here to make anybody angry. I just came here to tell you this is what I've observed from my position as a high school teacher with high school age kids. So as I say to my classes all the time, take this with a grain of salt. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Right? That's not my position. I know I get to leave here, but I only live 10 miles down the road, and you can probably find where I live. Right? It's not that hard, and you have technology. But the election and everything that has come from it and everything that preceded it has done a lot of damage to high school kids. And a lot of that is a result of what's been going on social media. And I think to a degree, the adults in America who are parents have to take a look in the mirror and say, what has been our part in that when it comes to how it's affected our kids? Because it really actually has. It's been revealed a little more now, and some of you probably are aware of this. They're calling it the Facebook papers, right? Where they're finding out more and more how Facebook has really sort of played a part in stoking the fire of anger in people by feeding them things that just fuel their fire. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute, but that has a trickle effect on kids down the line. So we found too at Unity that whatever kids were hearing at home, they were taking that and putting it on their social media and applying that to their stuff with their classmates at school. So we were dealing with issues at school as a result of politics and COVID that we never, ever would have had to deal with before. And I've wondered in my own head, how would COVID have gone? How would the election have gone if there wasn't a cell phone available to anybody? How different might it have been? I don't know. I don't know the answer because that's not the way it is. But when kids are labeling each other in a school day by whether they're conservative or liberal, or whether they're this or they're that, and they're literally dividing themselves up in a school, that's not healthy. That's not healthy for the school, and it's not healthy for the kids. And most of them don't necessarily always have a reason for why they think the way they do. They're just following along what they are told or what they think they know, right? And that's, for an educator, for a school, South has the same thing, I'm pretty sure. That's really difficult. That's really, really challenging. So I hope I can say that without it being inflammatory, because that's not what I want to do either. I'm going to give you an example of this. Down in the bottom left there is Smart News. And so I don't have a lot of apps. And I don't, just so you know, I don't do social media. That's one thing I've decided to just not have is social media. I got Facebook once because I wanted to put something on Marketplace. All right, it didn't work very well, so I don't use it. So you can't get a hold of me on Facebook, right? And that's not because I'm trying to be holier than thou. I don't want to deal with it, right? But I understand it because that's my job. So I went and I got this Smart News app. And I got this prior to the pandemic and prior to the election. And by their own description, it was supposed to be like, informational, just news that keeps you informed on what's going on. Okay, I'll get it. So I got it, and I would look at it every few days. I started to see, without really thinking this through, that they were sending me news feeds that really matched the stories that I previously had clicked on. And so if I didn't let's just say there was an article about Hudsonville onions, okay, and how they're, the Skur Farms is selling them at too high a price, and I read that, I clicked on that article, I read that. Well, the next thing, I'm getting an article the next day about how Skur Farms rips everybody off. And then I'm getting an article the next day about how Skur Farms is probably, immoral. And I'm every time I realize, stupid Skur Farms, and I'm getting angry at Skur Farms because they're sending me all these articles about Skur Farms. And I never thought of it, but it's been revealed now that when you get mad, when anger is cultivated that way, it changes the way you start to think. You start to lose empathy, and you just get angry. And anger drives you back to look for more. Like, I need to know more about this. This is ticking me off, and I'm going to find out more. There's never this might make you mad, but here's the other side of the story. We've become a very one-sided sort of a society that we only hear one side. And to be quite honest with you, nobody wants to be told what to do. Nobody. Well, that's not true. Very few people want to be told what to do. But nobody likes to feel like they're being manipulated. Nobody. And this is manipulation. You're being manipulated for profit. Because Smart News, Fox News, Newsmax, CNN, I just used 4 of them, they're doing it for profit. So you pick your profit, and then they make profit, right? That's the bottom line. And that is how anger and cultivating rage works in America. If you do your homework now on Facebook, you'll find that to be true, what is being revealed right now. That has a trickle effect on kids in the way they do social media and treat each other as well. Because one of the things that's been lost in culture and in high school too is empathy. I don't care that you don't like what I think. I don't care. Not, okay, we disagree, but let's talk about I don't care, period. And that's not good in Christian community. Those two things don't match. So that's a concern that we have as communities going forward with stuff like this is, what are we going to do about that? And again, my suggestion is not like just ban everything, although I will tell you, I got rid of Smart News, and I got a lot less angry. I don't want to be ignorant to the world. I don't want to be ignorant to the world. I want to know what's going on. That's part of a teacher's job, is to be aware. But I don't want to be suckered either. I want to be aware of what's going on without being suckered into a belief that I don't really have. So you can think about that for what it's worth. So if you look at all the things that sometimes adults in culture, parents, grandparents, older people, that they say, we cannot have this, and this is terrible. Think of all the cultural issues that have been going on in America over the last 18 months. All of them. I won't make a list. You say, and our kids, what about our kids, and how's it going to affect our kids? Every year, every single year with Unity kids, Unity seniors, I ask them, what is on your mind? What is it that you really need answers to? What do you want help with? What do you want to talk about? I ask them every single year at the same time at the very beginning of the school year. So this is this year's top 6, okay? And it's top 6 by a long shot. Like number 7 is way down the list. Other than sexuality, which has been on the list for a while, because kids just want to understand, like, what am I supposed to think about all this stuff? Where are the cultural issues that people get so bent out of shape about? They're not on the list. This is what kids want to understand. Help me figure out how I'm supposed to just live in this world. I don't need to figure out all this stuff that's in the news right now. I just need to figure out, like, peer pressure, dating. That might be the same list that you made in high school to a degree. So that part of kids, it's not different. They need to figure out, like, what does it mean to be 18 or 16 or 13 in this culture. So just so you know, the role of influencers, advertisers, it's huge. And I'll go through this really quick because I'm already watching my time here. But I don't think we can underestimate the role, the impact that influencers and advertisers have. There's something that I'll give them credit and then I'll tell them I hate them. But it's vape products. Okay, vaping is an issue. We thought it was going away, and now it's coming back. And there's new products. The FDA just approved a tobacco tasting vape for people who want to get off of smoking, so that's not a huge issue for high school kids. But Juul was the main thing several years ago. Juul is no longer the number one selling vape product. It's Puff. And look alongside the road. If you go for walks, you'll see them. Because once the kids are done with them, they just pitch them out the window. I pick them up all the time alongside the road. And that's not my neighbor who's 65 years old chucking it out there. Those are usually teenagers, right? And in high school, we know in high schools it's still an issue. Why? Well, the reason that vaping became such an issue is because of the massive social media presence that Juul had. Juul suckered kids, more or less, into, you should try this, because they pitched it to that audience and marketed it brilliantly for kids to jump at it, and they did. And now they're into it, right? Now, are they bad kids? No, they're not bad kids. They just made a bad choice with this that isn't very healthy for them, but they don't really realize like how much impact that advertising has. To be honest with you, I don't know how this night here was completely advertised. We're doing a different kind of night at Unity in November 10, and we have tried for years to put out paper flyers. I put them in Mr. Burger and Rainbow Grill in all these places around the area, and we put it on our website. We put it in Home Bulletin, all that, the stuff that we always have used to do. And it's been not really super effective. This year, we hired a marketing company. We hired a producing company to make videos. I'm a movie star now, right? So that's great. And we're going to see what happens. And the guy who's doing this for us says, I guarantee you'll have a bigger crowd. I'll guarantee it. Because what gets people is proper marketing. And marketing is not paper. Marketing is video. So I don't know what he's charging us. I don't know the bill yet. But he's guaranteeing that it's going to work. Right? So we'll see. Just so you know, this is 2016 to 2020. We're almost in 2022 here. But these are, I don't know if you can actually even see it, but on Instagram, which is the most popular social media app for kids, Cristiano Ronaldo, that number says 149 million. As of now, today I just looked it up, he's got just over 300 million followers on Instagram. He can command for a sponsored post, which is if Nike says, hey, we want you to mention our product in your next Instagram post. For every time he does that and mentions a specific product, he gets paid $1.6 million for doing that. Takes him probably 15 seconds, right? That is the way to go right there. So if you can connect with that kind of a job, that is the way to go. Now, maybe you know all these people, maybe you don't, but those are the top ones on Instagram. Now, do all of our kids follow all of them? Probably not, but they understand that very, very well. These are people that you may not know, but these are influencers, and they're called that because they have a tremendous amount of influence. So I won't ask you to say it, but can you raise your hand if you can name one of these people? Okay, I thought there had to be some. Somebody just say it. The guy up in the upper left up there. Mr. Beast. Yes, there we go. Like, Mr. what? Mr. Burger? Upper right. Dude Perfect. Bottom right. Nobody? No, that's bottom left, Addison Rae. Huda Katan. She's the number one YouTuber influencer who's female. Makeup, fashion, over 150 million followers on YouTube, right? And then the guy in the middle, Pewdiepie. Yeah, we got someone back there who knows their stuff. Pewdiepie. And if you wonder, like, what did his mother think when he named him? What in the world? Pewdiepie? Well, it's because when you play video games, when you shoot your gun, it's pew, pew. And then they die. Pew die. And apparently he likes pie. So Pewdiepie, right? And I don't want to say this wrong, so I'll make sure I get the numbers right. But he is a video game reviewer. People will tune in to watch him play a video game online. The guy's a genius because, like, how better could you make money than that? He makes $12 million a year doing his job. $12 million a year. And he's got 110 million subscribers on YouTube. So I don't know exactly how old he is, but he's certainly not old, but he's not a kid anymore either. So he's younger than me. But these influencers is a term that didn't exist even 5-6 years ago. But influencers, these are just the big ones, but they're having an influence in the way people think, the way they talk, the way they behave, the way they act. Influencers are having influence on our kids, okay? There's a huge concern that I think many of you know about already of exposure to illicit content, pornography. There's a video that if you have a chance to watch, some of the stats I give you tonight are from this video. It's on, you just look up the website, but it's called Childhood 2.0. It's a documentary. Just Google Childhood 2.0, you can watch it. Some of the information I'm giving you tonight is from there. So I learned from there as well. 27% of all internet traffic at any given time is pornographic, right? So 1/4 of all internet traffic is pornographic in nature. So it's basically like saying 1 in every 4 things you're going to come across is going to be of pornographic type nature. That is a huge amount of things to sort of sift through if you are a unfiltered kid looking at content online. And then there's the many, many things that they don't understand, obviously, about that as well. So what impact does that sort of exposure have? So people used to talk about the age of first exposure to pornography. Well, when I first started doing these talks, that conversation was like 14, 15 years old was the age of average first exposure. Well, the most agreed upon number now is 9, right? And most people say it's actually probably a little earlier than that. That doesn't mean that they're voluntarily searching it out, but they're exposed to it, many times unintentionally. But that's not going away, right? And that's something, it's not a matter of like, well, I don't think my kid probably has. Actually, probably he or she has, because even if you did everything you could to restrict their phone and their computer and whatever else, unless they always are in your house 24/7, other people have phones and computers as well. So you can't keep them from it. You have to teach them how to deal with it. And that's the change in culture. Back in the day, don't get Playboy magazine, right? And you probably, that takes care of the majority of your problem. I'm going to tell your middle school kids on Friday a story about going to one of my friend's houses and going to his fort when I was in 5th grade. My first time ever being exposed to pornography, and how that left an imprint on my brain, even though that was a magazine I could hardly see because it was so rain-soaked. But he found it somewhere and whatever. Well, that's totally different now. And that, frankly, that magazine is PG-13 compared to what kids have access to today. Completely. And most of you know that. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know when I say that. One other thing, and again, I certainly don't want to be the bearer of bad news on this, but just because we do live in, I talk about the real world, even though overall sexual assaults are down, it's more common amongst younger people than it used to be. And so there has been more and more of a connection in terms of law enforcement too, between early exposure to either being abused or early exposure to graphic pornography and those who are more likely to commit sexual crimes. And so there's something there that we need to be aware of and actually in conversation with our kids about as well. All right, this is something else I just want you to be aware of. And many of you know this. This is actually advertised now on radio pretty heavily if you listen to radio. But Duckduckgo is one example of a browser, a web browser now, that unlike Google, they don't track anything. It's a very, very private browser. So anywhere you go, as long as you hit clear tabs at the end, it burns all history of wherever you've been. So you cannot know where someone else has been online. And so you don't need to be an adult to get it. So if you have a phone, you just go to the Google Play Store or you go to the App Store and you download DuckDuckGo and you've got a browser that you have no idea what they've looked at online because it clears everything from the memory. And Bing, now Microsoft's version of a browser, Bing has that feature as well, a private browser that burns everything basically when you want to clear the tabs. So again, that stuff's not going away. Google was great for a while, but kids learned how to delete the history on computers. So they're always one step ahead, but it's just good to be aware that those things exist. And again, some of that is for profit because who are the biggest subscribers to apps like this right now? It's people under 25. Because the 65-year-olds usually have a lot less to hide, right? That they're not really worried if you find out that they're checking out, prune juice. Nobody really cares, right? So that's the difference. This is a huge one, and I want to spend just a little bit of time with this one as well. A concern for for school, educators, for churches, for parents, it's a concern for everyone, is how all of this has affected teenagers' mental health. We're not going to talk about adults, we're going to talk about teenagers. So I'll give you some most recent and current statistics here just to make you aware. Going back about 10 years worth of data, so it's reliable. Okay, how has what has been going on affected our kids in terms of their own mental health? Well, 2007 and 2009 were pretty important years when it comes to this. 2007 is when basically the modern version of social media really was, launched. 2009 is when Facebook started to put out likes. Okay, so you could like something on Facebook in 2009, and Twitter started using retweets as a way to track how much traffic you were getting, online. So what difference did that make? Well, mental health disorders start to rise. There were two in particular. So of all mental health disorders, everything from depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, you can go on down the list, of this whole list. They've always gradually risen, kind of on a gradual curve. Well, after 2009, two of them just shot straight up. This skyrocketed. And you're not going to be surprised at all which those two are. There was a 189% increase in anxiety for 10 to 14-year-old girls. That's our middle school girls. Now, they're not experiencing more of any other sort of mental health disorder, just anxiety and depression. It is so common today for kids to say they have anxiety. It's so common. Now, granted, some of them, when they say that, they don't exactly know what it is they're describing, because everybody says, I have anxiety. I'm dealing with anxiety today. What does that mean? Just like kids overuse the word addiction. I'm addicted to this. Well, what does that mean? I don't know, but I'm addicted. Okay, well, actually, you're not, but okay, I get it as a problem for you. But this is real. 189% increase in anxiety for that group of kids. 151% increase in suicide for 13 to 18-year-old girls. Now, again, there's causation and there's correlation, and those aren't the same things. So you can't necessarily always make a one-to-one connection between suicide and social media. But when you look at all the factors, there is absolutely a correlation between those two. We just can't say it's the cause of, because that's not scientifically fair or right to do that. There's a 231% increase for 10 to 14-year-old girls, right? And again, that's suicide. That's a massive spike that wasn't there previously. And this, just so you are aware, the rates of depression and anxiety among teens dramatically increase when comparing those who spent the least amount of time to those who spent the most time on social media. So again, as a parent, as an educator, as a community, what more do you need to see to say, yeah, there's something going on here? Last year at Unity, there was a young man. Girls usually struggle more with depression and anxiety as a result of social media. I'll talk about why in just a bit. Guys, it's for different reasons. But girls, it's especially, that's why there's more statistics on the girls here. But there was a boy at Unity last year who was really, really struggling. Just could not keep his stuff together. And that's a bad way of saying he was struggling with mental health. And he was in school, he was out of school, his parents were really worried, whatever. Well, they had a long conversation, and they said, listen, number one, you're going to bed at 10 o'clock at night. That's number one. Number two, we're taking your phone. We're taking your phone. You can have it during the school day, during this and this hours, but we're taking your phone. In 2 weeks, that kid was a different kid. He was a different kid. Now, he was mad at his parents because he wanted his phone back, right? So I'm not going to say he was thanking his parents, because he wasn't. But he was a different kid because he did not have the pressure of that phone anymore, because his parents made him take it away and made him get a solid 8 hours of sleep at night. It made a massive difference in this kid. Sometimes the solutions are not that complicated, but it's so hard to do. It's so hard. This one here, just so you know, that percentage is 13% to 66. So less time means less chance of problems when it comes to these two things. More time, a greater chance that you might have some issues with this, just because of the age, the brain development, everything else. And they're more likely to experience isolation. Okay, and this will go to a different area here of how are these things affecting them? Let me just flip over here just real quick a minute. So if you want, you can generate a list here of like, okay, if there's a problem with isolation, then what do I have to do? What could I do to actually offset this? So maybe you could come up with in your head a list of remedies or solutions to sort of offset some of these things that kids are experiencing. So isolation, okay, despite the fact that they're more concerned, they're also really, really isolated. Just as a fact, kids today in Gen Z, they spend less time with their friends by about 6 hours per week than you did when you were in high school. Now you say, well, wait a minute, my kid's always maybe yours, but as a whole, kids spend less time with their friends than they used to back a generation ago, because they can go home and still be very connected to their friends and not actually be physically present with their friends. And some kids today would actually prefer to be digitally present with their friends than to be physically present with their friends. It's easier for them. That's why some of them, when they get together, they struggle with how to have that conversation. You ever see those circles of kids and they're all on their phones? That's really, really common. Now, they're all good kids, probably, but they struggle like, okay, what do we do now? And they have just more time in their bedroom. One thing I'm sure South has this issue too, because we're very similar schools, is there's a massive fear for boys and girls of judgment. So there's this weird sort of juxtaposition. Kids have sometimes massive online presences with their social media, but they're terrified of being judged. So a very common phrase is, you can't judge me, don't judge me. And they don't even always know what they mean when they say that, but don't judge me. So that comes across in the real world as lack of participation in certain things. So as a real world example, we have for years at Unity done this like a Winterfest sort of homecoming thing in the winter, and then that involves getting kids to participate in these games that we play as a student body at lunchtime or break. Over the years, it's been harder and harder and harder to get kids to participate in those games. It used to be we had to turn kids away. We had too many kids, but now it's getting harder to get them to want to, because they know that whatever they do is not going to be just with that one little situation, because someone's going to be recording it, someone's going to make a meme about it, someone's going to post it. And so I'm not going to deal with that. Trolls, if you've ever heard of trolls before, being a troll online is that you're making a judgment, you're trying to put somebody down for whatever, and that has caused a problem. So the isolation also goes into how they gather together. What if I get left out? And because of technology and social media, being left out is a completely different experience than it was when you were in high school. Because if you didn't get asked to hang out with your friends, there's a better than average chance that you had no idea that you were not being asked to hang out with your friends. But if you're all on social media or you're all on a group chat, well, you're going to know, because kids post everything that they do. So you know that they're sitting there at a restaurant, or they're out doing this, or they're at somebody's house, and you know that because they posted about it. And you now know that you didn't get invited. So you've just been socially isolated from that group. So not tagging something on a post, not tagging a specific person, photoshopping people out. There's so many different ways that kids feel isolated today that they couldn't necessarily before. Comparisons. This is huge. I think some of you are very, very well aware of this. You've heard of filters. Snapchat is really famous for their filters when you take pictures, and every single kid knows. They all know that filters on Snapchat are all fake. They know that the pictures they're receiving are fake. They're not real. It doesn't matter. The new standard is how to compare the fakes, right? So it doesn't matter that it's airbrushed or fake or whatever. It's, completely not real. It's still an issue. So I don't look as good as you. You don't look as I just can't deal with all this comparison. I don't know who I am anymore. So I think some of you probably have experienced that. There's something called Clout Addiction when it comes to like, how many people can I get to like my stuff? How many people can I get to follow my things? So in the high school world, that's called Clout Addiction. And a validation from strangers. I don't know if it would have mattered to you when you were in high school if someone you didn't know told you that they liked something that you did that you weren't even aware that they knew you were doing. How big of an impact that would have. But social media has allowed it, just by the number of likes you get, like a validation of something, a post from someone you don't even know, actually increases your level of self-awareness, self-confidence, whatever, or just as easily drives that down. So those comparisons of each other, younger age, especially with girls on social media, really makes a difference for them. And overall, kids today have a decrease in physical activity. PE is becoming something, I think South and Unity still have required PE courses, but in general in America, it's something that's not being done as much anymore. And physical activity and a lack of depression are two things that also have a very close connection. I've told several kids when they come to me with issues of anxiety or depression, like, what do you do to exercise? What are you doing? I'm not really doing anything. Well, okay, then you need to start doing something. And again, I don't have specific data. I'll go off the schools that I've worked with in the past, in high schools. I can't say for middle schools. There's a lower rate of anxiety and depression overall with kids who are in athletics because they're physically moving nearly every day. And there's a lower rate yet for kids who are in 3 different sports. Not the same sport all year long, but 3 different sports. Why? 3 different groups of people that I'm with in person for the entire school year, and I'm physically active. So those are the kids that have the lowest, and this is anecdotal evidence, okay, not scientific data, anecdotal, the lowest rates. So if you want to help simply a kid, tell them they got to start running. Give them $1 for every mile, whatever, right? Whatever you got to do. If I can run a marathon, anybody can. So that's another thing just to maybe think about. And distraction. Okay, another concern maybe to just talk about just a little bit with this. So how many of you have heard of, just curious, you've heard of nomophobia? A couple of you. Nomophobia is the fear of not having my phone with me. And it's a real thing. So if you've ever seen someone kind of go into panic mode when it's not because they lost an expensive phone, it's because they lost contact with the world. And so nomophobia for teenagers is a real thing. And because they're so connected in that way, they're also very distracted by it. Being a teacher in 2021 is a hard job to do when it comes to dealing with technology because schools wrestle with how best to deal with that issue of the phone. We do have parents who get really upset if we take their kids' phone away because they feel like they have to have access to their children as well. Not many, but there are some there as well. The average YouTube video, length of the video for YouTube for kids today, 45 seconds long. Okay, that's it. 45 seconds is the average length of the video. So if they're watching videos in 45-second chunks, how hard is it to get them to read a 2-page article? It's really, really hard. Every teacher knows, like, oh my gosh, you got to read it to them half the time because they don't want to read it. It's really, and that's been cultivated into them over the years in some ways because of technology. It used to be that if you showed a video in your class for the entire class period, that was like golden class period. You know, that was like awesome. A video for the whole hour is too long now. You got to keep it short because otherwise they're just done. They're going to go to their phone, right, and look at that and look at a 45-second video. So that's a result of some of the things that have happened as well. And then that sleep deprivation. I like to mention this more than one time because the average kid today in high school in America gets less than 6 hours of sleep a night. The American Pediatric Association recommends high school age kids and middle school age kids get a bare minimum of 8.5 hours of sleep a night. They recommend 10. And our kids are getting maybe 6. So teachers, we all see those students that come into class and they cannot function because they've been gaming since 2 wee hours, they've been on their social media, they're just dead. Not because they had too much homework the night before, they're distracted by their phones and that causes a problem. There's a real world consequence for sleep deprivation. For adults too, it literally does shorten the lifespan of an adult if they don't sleep enough. Well, same thing with kids. What has it led to? Well, now we have a generation of kids too that's hyper caffeinated, right? They're Red Bulls and Monsters, and more kids drink coffee today than I would have ever thought possible. I have a junior in high school, one of my own kids. She drinks a cup of coffee every morning. It's like my dad, right? I can't figure this out. But that's just the world they sort of live in. So for you, okay, as a parent, some things to consider. Here's where I say, what are we going to do? Okay, lay down all these things, like what are we supposed to do? First thing is this. I'm going to ask you to consider to discern social media culture. If it is true that in some ways we are being manipulated by social media and the culture that it tries to produce, How do we have a conversation with our kids about how to discern social media properly? Maybe a model for that, and this would be very challenging for some people, on a news feed, if you're going to have, let's just use Twitter as an example, probably a good thing to use. And again, I don't care about your politics. I really don't. That's for you to decide. I don't want to get into it. I'll just use an example. But if you're going to follow Donald Trump on Twitter, actually you can't. Let's go with this. If you're going to follow Donald Trump Jr. on Twitter, then you probably should follow his opposite as well. Even if you don't like reading that, you need to have some balance. I was taught this by a former principal. Some of you know who he was. He passed away 4 years ago. But Jack Postma, former principal of Unity, he taught me this. He said, if you're going to do your job well with kids, you have to make sure that you seek first to understand, then to be understood. And those are words I live by every day. So as parents, in this culture here, if we could seek understanding first and then to be understood, but we sort of become, just all talk to a degree first. If we are the hands and feet of Jesus, then maybe the hands and feet have been amputated to a degree and we're just a big mouth, potentially. So it's just a way, and again, not in any way trying to be offensive, but I really believe that much of what our kids do, it starts with us. It really does. They will model parents when it comes to this. And I know it's true because I talk to kids about this all the time. Parents are still a huge, huge influence for them in their day-to-day lives, more than anybody else, frankly. All right, then, next thing is I think it's important that you have an understanding of triggers for kids and the remedies for that as well. Triggers for a kid going into pornography, triggers for a kid asking a girl for nudes, triggers for a kid looking for something that isn't healthy for him. The number one trigger for both boys and girls to go a place where they probably shouldn't, it won't surprise you, is boredom. Boredom is the number one trigger. There's anxiety and stress. There's anger. Those are all triggers, but the number one trigger for kids is boredom. I'm sitting in my room with my phone, and I'm just bored. And so what can I do? And it's hard to blame a kid for that because, again, I think I would have done the same thing. I'm pretty sure I would have, and I think you would have too. So the remedy for that is to get them out of that position where the trigger is causing a problem, right? And so if you have a kid who struggles, if you have a son or daughter, or if you know someone who struggles with pornography, you have to address the heart of that student, obviously, but it's also important to address the triggers. What are those things for you? And let's figure out a way to remove those from you. And another trigger for illicit pornographic content is placement. We'll talk about that in a second. Where's your phone? Where's your phone? And a lot of kids ask me, I don't think I really have a problem. I don't really think I do. All right, well, if you're bored and your phone's in your room at night, this is something I ask a lot of kids. Let's just say that you have your dresser right here, okay? You're alone in your room and no one's going to come in there. Let's figure out to what degree this is an issue for you. If you're in there and the phone's over there, how compelled are you to go to that phone? Can you just sit on your bed or sit in a chair or whatever and just leave it there and it really doesn't cause you any problem? If they say, yeah, I can do that, okay, well, then you really don't have that big of a problem at this point. But if you're like, oh, man, I really want to go to that phone, really want to, and it's kind of hard to get that out of your head, that's a little more compulsive then. Like, maybe you have an issue there. But some of us have had this feeling before, like you want something so badly, like it's not just like I kind of really want to go over there. You have you sweat, like your hands get clammy and you might start breathing a little harder. And it's almost like a drug that when you actually go grab your phone, it's like this endorphin release, like, oh, thank God I got my phone. And that's more towards addiction. Like I got a problem now and I have to remove this thing from my presence so I got to break that endorphin cycle because it doesn't just go away by itself. And that's something that for adults we can look at is how do we understand those triggers and remedies. For parents, this is a tough one. I'm a parent of 2 college-age boys and 2 high school-age girls, so I get this one as well. When I say avoid the lawnmower, what I mean is lawnmower parenting. That's a phrase that some of you probably are familiar with. There's an older phrase called helicopter parenting, where the parents always kind of hovered. They were always around all the time. Well, lawnmower parenting, our parents always plow down the grass in front of their kids so their kids face no obstacles at all. They make it too easy for their kids. And it would be good sometimes for our kids to struggle. One of the best teachers in life for all people is failure. And some parents are afraid to let their kids fail for fear that they can't deal with that failure because of all the other stuff they got going on. I can't risk having them fail, so I will make sure they clear the path. In high school, that can take the form of, I know you really want to get into Calvin. I know you really, really do. So I'm going to write your application essay for you because I want to make sure it's really good. Don't worry, I got it for you. Now they're helping their kid or they're really hurting their kid? Well, they're really hurting them actually, because not only do they not allow them to potentially fail, but without really wanting to or desiring to, they're slowly creating little narcissists, right, who believe that everything revolves around their needs. And that's not healthy for them as young people. So sometimes punishment, consequence, and failure are powerful teachers for kids. And in the world we live in, sometimes you feel like a bad parent when you discipline your kids. And actually that makes you a good parent. This isn't a good parenting necessarily, but I was told this by an old guy that I went to church with. He's long since passed away. When we had our oldest son, the day we baptized him, this guy said a bunch of stuff. And I got this tiny little baby in my arms. And he said, Dan, I'll just tell you this. If your kids don't hate you once in a while, you're not doing your job. I was like, well, thanks. Whatever. That was not what I was expecting to hear today. But to a degree, I knew where he was coming from. So that's part of maybe the solution to this as well. And modeling for your kids. Here's something that I wait till now to just share with you. But honestly, statistics show that in homes where phone use for kids are a problem, like the kids have a hard time not being on their phones, the statistics show that their parents actually are on their phones more. So they model that as well. And I hate to make parents feel guilty. You don't need any more guilt in your life, right? That's not the point of this. But it really does make a difference. If you don't have your phone out at mealtime, it makes it far easier for you to say to your kids, you can't have your phone out at mealtime because now you're the model for that. If you don't have your phone every time you're sitting down in the living room, that's a model for your kids. There was a girl that came from a broken home that went to Unity, and when she was with her dad, when it was time for to go live with her dad for the weekend or whatever, every time she went into the living room, because I'm sure this was his practice when he was just by himself, he was on his phone. She's there just for the weekend, so she told me, I don't know how to have a conversation with my dad because every time I go in the living room, he's on his phone. And if I say, Dad, can you put your phone away? He'll do it, but then he'll just take it right back out, right? So he's not a bad guy. I don't want to give you the wrong impression, but he's teaching his daughter something as well. And that's really important to recognize that they're modeling, they will model what we do. And parenting is not easy. If being a kid is hard today, it's very, very hard to be a parent today too. And I don't want to diminish that or make it sound like it isn't, because it's hard. Then, really quickly here, there's something called the normalization of defects, which cannot happen. And that comes from NASA, and my second NASA reference tonight. What that means is when they had, if you remember, they had the Challenger explosion, but then also way back into the Apollo rockets, they had the fire with Gus Grissom and all those guys that were killed. In both those situations, what NASA found is that there were little errors that they thought, well, okay, it's not that big of a deal, it'll be fine. And that those errors became normalized. And eventually those errors caught up with them, and they caused a big problem. So when you say, well, it's not that big of a deal, it's not. I mean, there's worse things. That's the normalization of defects. So if there's something wrong, we got to address that. So one of the things that is probably the new standard for parenting in 2021 going forward, we have to normalize conversations about pornography, because they're already normal for our kids in terms of what they're seeing. We have to normalize that. My parents were fantastic parents, but they were lousy at conversations about sex. Just flat out lousy. My dad handed me a book and said, if you have any questions, ask. That was the sex talk that I got from my dad. He's a great father, but he was terrible at that because that was not the generation. Public schools today are teaching sex ed, and they're being told by their students that it's boring. It's really, really boring. because what they're getting from Pornhub online is far outpacing whatever they're getting in their public school sex ed class. They already know that, right? And so we have to be familiar with, like, no, not familiar with what's on porn sites, but familiar with having a conversation like, I know what's out there. We need to talk about what it is you're seeing. Because if you can do that, then your kid is more likely to come to you and say, I got this picture sent to me. What am I supposed to do? Or if you can say to your son, there's a lot of really beautiful girls in your school. It is not okay to send a picture of your genitals to anybody. It's not okay, and here's why. Because that happens. It happens a lot. And most kids think it's not a problem because, well, we've sort of normalized the defect. We're like, oh, please don't let it be my kid. It is your kid, because it is every kid. Not literally every kid is sending nudes, but you would be surprised to some degree how really good kids get caught up in really bad decisions. It just happens. So if we can normalize some of those defects, and that kind of goes with the next point, it's not just about setting up those barriers. There are some really good barriers. If you're interested, and I can give this to you later too, for you, not for your kids, there's a few resources out there that give you some guidance, like how do you start? How do you start this? These are three of them: Smartphone Sanity, TechWise Family, and TechWise Life. The second two are written by the editor for Christianity Today magazine and his wife. And Smartphone Sanity is put out there by a company called Axis, which I'll show you on this slide here as well. I can give this to you later. I can send it to your school, whatever. But these are just some of the tools that you can use to at least restrict some of the access. But for a high school, college, adult age person, this is not the answer. This is maybe part of the solution, making it a little harder to get to them. For grade school kids, this is great. If you have young children right now, I'll just give you this as a piece of information. There's a phone now that you can get. It's called Gabb, G-A-B-B. And it's a phone that specifically is set up for young people to have. It's a great, great idea for kids who need a phone but don't want all the junk. And Gabb, look it up online when you go home. I would strongly encourage it. And again, with all respect to the audience who's here tonight and every one of you, when you give a fully functional smartphone to a grade school kid or a middle school kid, it's like giving them a loaded gun. Now, maybe it won't go off, but you want to take that chance? I don't, right? And high school kids have a hard enough time dealing with the power of that phone. Middle school kids, they can't. They're just incapable of dealing with that unfiltered. They need that. They have to have it. Grade school kids, they have to have more than that. They just do. So my son, when he was in high school, he said to me, because we did some of this stuff when he was younger, he said, Dad, someday I'm going to go off to college. What are you going to do then? And I said, well, I'm coming with you, obviously, right? What do you think? And I said, well, hopefully by that time, you know, we'll be in a spot where you feel like you can sort of take the ball and run with it, and I can just be a resource for you distant, because he's 700 miles away, right? Both of my boys are. So these are things to start with and gradually wean off as they take more responsibility. All right, I'm going to share this with you briefly because I'm going to share this with the kids on Friday, and I want you to know what your kids are going to see if they're in middle school. Steps for kids: where you put your phone, and I'll talk about sleep with your kids. Don't buy the excuse from your children that they need their phone for an alarm. They're about $6 at Walgreens if you want to get a phone or an alarm for your kid. There's no real reason for a phone to be in a bedroom. And frankly, it is a huge issue for kids because they don't have the willpower or the whatever to resist the phone in their bedroom. You're setting the kid up for a problem. They're setting themselves up for a problem. It needs to be out of there, okay? And I hate to sound like that, but it's really true. And having it out of there will make it easier for them to sleep. Kids are 24/7 contact now. Kids are so in touch with that phone that even on vibrate mode, many of them will wake up. I get texts from kids sometimes that come at 3 a.m. to me. Now, I don't get them at 3 a.m. because I don't respond to my phone at 3. I'm sleeping. But it comes at 3 a.m. College kids, that's almost all the stuff I get is from 2 to 4 a.m. from those kids. That's when it comes to me. So where that phone is matters. In college, you can't control it if you're gone, but in high school, middle school, you certainly can. And I'll spend quite a bit of time with this with your sons and daughters and grandkids, but identity. We didn't talk a lot about this tonight because that wasn't the main focus of what I wanted to say, but they need to be thinking about who am I and why does that matter? I'm not a consumer product. I'm not just a product, period. I have an identity that is rooted in my image, in God's image. Why does that matter, and how does it relate to this? We have to have those kind of heart conversations with kids. It's not just about saying no to them. So the speech that I give, the talk that I give to your kids on Friday, I don't want to be able to give that same speech if I went down the street and gave it at East Kentwood. It needs to be different than that because this is a Christian school and these are kids who are growing up in the covenant, right? And so their identity matters, and that matters for phone use and technology use as well. And I'll talk briefly. I put boyfriend and girlfriend. I'll make some jokes about that with middle schoolers. But friends having digital boundaries. You need time and space away. You can't be in contact all the time with your friends. You got to have some separation. It's really actually good for you, right? When you dated in high school, if you did, and you dropped your girlfriend off at her house, that was it. Until maybe the next day, maybe the next Monday, maybe never. It depends on how good it went, right? But many of our kids today, they're getting texts on the way home. They haven't even got home themselves and they're already getting snaps and stuff like that from the person that they just went out with. And while that's fun and kind of cute and whatever else, it's also not healthy. There's no time to what's really going on here because I'm always there. It's sort of digital drowning in relationships. And to encourage face-to-face communication is still the best. I would say probably 3 days out of 5 every week when I talk to kids about issues they're having with friendships or boyfriends or girlfriends, I remind them, you have to have this conversation in person. You cannot have this over social media or text. You have to talk to that person. I don't know if I can do it. Yeah, you have to do it. You have to do that because it's the right thing to do and it's the way you will best convey whatever it is you actually have, what you want to say. You do it too because I do it and all your kids do it too. You read into whatever a text says. What do they mean by that? I think they mean by, what is that emoji? All that kind of stuff. So this is still the best. And for kids, it can happen to you. All the stuff that we worry about, it can happen to you. I want you to know this. And again, this is not a scare tactic, but I found this fascinating. This came off the Childhood 2.0 as well. But they did a Bark. There's a organization called Bark. And that's one of the things I showed you there that is a filter. It's a really, really good organization. They did this setup, basically. They put together a profile on Instagram of a teenager. Okay, it was fake. They had law enforcement involved in this as well. And it was a girl, and it was young and attractive and whatever. This girl, her profile picture, and they posted it. Okay, they made it live. And they wanted to see what was going to happen. Okay, and the girl who they did this with was a teenager. So she said, I'm a teenager, so on and so on. And then finally they said, okay, she's 15. Okay, that's eventually what the fake girl revealed. Well, once they went live with that, within 1 hour, 7 adult men had reached out to that post to say, hey, who are you? How old are you? Where do you live? Those kind of things. In 1 week, 92 adult men had responded to that post. Okay, this is just a random Instagram posting out there. And all of these men were adults, and that's part of the grooming process for, even if they never meet, just a grooming process for, I want to get to know you, and maybe I can ask for some pictures, stuff like that. Then they did another one with an 11-year-old girl. They made another fake one with an 11-year-old girl. It was right up front, I'm 11 years old. Okay, it took 1 minute and 7 seconds to get the first ping on that when that went live. 1 minute and 7 seconds. And excuse me for being graphic on this, but the profile picture of that 1 minute, 7 second response, the picture in the profile was a picture of a penis. If it actually had been an 11-year-old girl, that's what she would have seen. So that's what parents have to sort of be aware of, and we have to talk about that with our kids. It's one thing to say, don't do this, kids, but we got to talk about that if this were to ever happen. I talk about that in class now. I say to my kids, there's literally nothing you can say to me that will make me embarrassed because I feel like I've talked about it all. So I'm just going to tell you, here's the deal. Here's the deal. And they want to hear it. They really want to know because they don't know. They might act like they do, but they don't know. And to know that, yeah, it can happen to me too, that's really good information because then it's less likely to happen to them. And one other little side note with that, a long time ago, we had a situation where a girl at Unity had gotten pregnant, and it was handled very, very well by the parents, and everybody involved was handled really well. But another parent in the school was not happy with the fact that we had a girl at school who was pregnant. When, again, that's a very traumatic thing for a high school girl to have to deal with. So the mother came and talked to me about this, and she's very upset that we weren't disciplining in a different whatever. I won't get into all the details, but she said to me, and I'll tell you one thing, Dan, that would never happen with my daughter. That would never happen with my daughter. You want to know why? And frankly, I didn't want to know, but she's going to tell me either way. She said, I'll tell you why it's never going to happen, because I taught my daughter right. And I was like, oh, lady. I didn't say anything, because at that point you can't really say anything. But in my experience as a teacher, for parents and kids who believe that those things can't happen to them because they're better than those things, those are the people who tend to have the problems with those things. It's the people who are like, yeah, this could happen to me. I better sort of watch myself, right? The Bible talks about it all the time. Know your enemy. Run. It's very, very clear. So if we can do that, that helps our kids as well. And then the move for your kids is just do something, okay? Get up, go play basketball, run around the block, whatever. There's lots of things middle schoolers can do. They got endless amounts of energy. I taught 3 years in middle school, and then I saw the light, and I went to high school. But no, I love the middle school kids. They're great, but they have a lot of energy for sure. So if you have any questions about this, and again, I like to use this as sort of a discerning thing, is don't let that out of your sight, okay? The discernment that we all need. And then if you want a little assignment for tonight, go look up Romans 8 when you get home. That is a very, very, very uplifting, positive, and hopeful passage about it doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter what you've experienced. There's no condemnation, and there's hope in the future because of Jesus Christ. So we talk often at Unity about, I don't care what you've done. We'll talk about it. We can deal with it, but I don't care what you've done. You're here today. How are we going to go forward? And that sort of grace given to kids allows them to say, I don't have to feel guilt about whatever I've done, experienced, whatever. Guilt, a little bit of it, drives you to the cross for forgiveness. Shame drives you away from the cross and keeps you where the devil wants you. So we want our kids coming to it, right? That's what we want. So here's my recommendation. If you have younger kids, the recommendation I would have is Bark. That is a really, really good organization, and their algorithms to sort of filter out junk for younger kids is really, really effective. Most of these cost something, but the cost is well worth it, and it's not expensive. Ever Accountable is what I personally use with my kids, and I found that to be very effective as well. So if you're wondering, is there a way around all these things? Yeah, kids are kids, and if they really want to get around them, they probably could. But at that age, Bark usually works really, really well, and so does Ever Accountable. Covenant Eyes has been around for a long time, but some people don't like it because it gets up a little bit in your business too much, and it can slow down some of your computing functions where the others don't do that as much. CPYU, Access, Common Sense Media, Fight the New Drug, and Protect Young Eyes are organizations that talk about those kind of things. But the three filters up there are Bark, Covenant Eyes, and Ever Accountable. And the top and the bottom ones are the ones I recommend the most.